Hey, folks, welcome to the pre-show of the program. Nothing to shake a stick at or write home about. It's just the setup time. How y'all doing tonight? Morgan Snow, good to see you. Randall Flagg, nice to see you. People gathering out there outside the chat room, nice to see that you're here. Come on in. Happy Friday night, everyone. We've got about a minute and a half, and we go live over on the radio station. Lights are a little bright tonight, but that's okay. I'm going to be doing a little reading, and I don't want to struggle with it. So, yeah, this is how that looks. Boom. Bright lights. So there we go. I think it'll work. And I got a few things to show you. A few things to talk about. A few things I wanted to talk about that I couldn't find. And a few scary things to talk about. Let's see. We're going to... blah, 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 blah. Horror is fun. Did you know that? 9:02 and 23 seconds. We're getting there. Hope you're all doing fine tonight. Pearson Castile, good to see you. Glad you made it in. Oh, I'm going to shut that down. Working on my website on and off all day today, beefing some things up. Go over there, ScottAllenRoberts.com. Take a peek. Look at my portfolio section. Here we go. Going dark. Stand by.
The Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Hey, folks, welcome to the program. I'm your host, Scotty Roberts. This is my show. Happy Friday. It's the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. You can find us in our audio format over on the radio at odysyradio.com, as always. And you can find all the archives of this show over there as well. Just root around a bit. And I think for the next day, he always plays the previous day's broadcast, so you can catch it tomorrow over there in audio format. You can also, if you're not there now, come on over to the YouTube channel. That is where there is the best version of the chat room available to this show. If you are looking at chat on Facebook or Twitter, well, X, and any other place, that chat room will not play in the main chat room, which is over on the YouTube channel. And so you won't see the other YouTubers or the other people on YouTube that are chatting, and they won't see you. So only I will, because I have control of it all. I am in control. I wish I had an echo. In control. Roll. So come on over there, and that's youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. And tonight we're going to continue talking a little bit about books, but I thought it was fun because it's a Friday night. And remember when we were a little bit younger, Friday nights were like party. See, even that hurts to do that now. I can't do that like I used to. And one of the last times I went partying, I was already around 40 years old. And a friend of mine from the festival said, we've been invited by a bunch of these girls, ladies from the festival that want us to go along with them and clubbing. And they were a lot younger than I was. And so they got all dolled up to go clubbing. And if you've never been clubbing, or if you don't know what clubbing means, then you're probably my age or somewhere between my age and 30. So we went clubbing. And I said, what does one wear clubbing anymore? I was 40. I hadn't been clubbing which we never really did, but going out on the town since I was in my 20s. So here I am, 15 years posthumous from my 20s, just about. So what did I wear? I put on my kilt and my kilt socks and my big combat boots and my fisherman's cable knit sweater that went along with my kilt. And so I went out clubbing with them. And one of the really hot chicks that we went along with, she drank a little too much, as everybody was doing. And she was out dancing, and she was out actually throwing up alcohol on the dance floor. But she didn't stop dancing the whole time. She was like, yeah. And she just kept going. Now, there's a horror story for you right there. And I was just like, oh, I think. Anyway, we ran into a bachelorette party. Who all of them now talk about guys getting frisky and handsy and things like that. That night, because I was wearing a kilt, I had more young women reaching up under my kilt, pinching my bare ass than I'd had ever in my life up until that point. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. That's what goes on in clubbing. And I think that's the last time I ever went clubbing. And I don't know why I brought up clubbing, but there it is. So now we're going to tonight. Oh, that's what we used to do on Friday nights, is the point. Tonight, if you're home and you're listening to radio, or at your work and you're listening to radio, or watching this show somehow, this show is not like an action-packed television show. You're not going to see a lot of visuals with a lot of flashy color and explosions and car chases and sex and romance and things like that. We're going to paint those pictures in words. So if you're watching, you probably got it passively watching it on the side, or I have many people have said they put it up on their TVs and they go about their business. So, I was just noticing Pearson said prayers with everyone in Nebraska tonight. They had some pretty bad tornadoes today. I had not heard about that. So, definitely, it's that season is on us. We're getting thunderstorms up here throughout the weekend. So they're saying. So, Friday night. Let's make it a night tonight. Why don't you get a cup of coffee or a cup of something? I didn't grab my drink. I've got a little bit of one that's left over here, a little lukewarm, but I'll drink it. Not lukewarm, just not cold anymore. And I want to show you a couple of things and read a couple of things and talk about, kind of carry on these 5 reasons we kind of left off about reading horror stories to kids. And I think this is appropriate. This can be just a new topic tonight that kind of trails along what we've been doing all week long. And these days, horror in what would you call it? Young adult to young reader, kidlit land is having a moment, from the increases in horror titles being published all the way to the recently added middle grade category for the Bram Stoker Awards for superior achievement in a novel. There are lots of things moving in kids' books. As a middle grade horror aficionado to a certain degree, I've written some books to middle grade, some books to young adults. I guess that's where you'd put Tam O'Hare, you'd put the archaeology book, you'd put The Sword and the Clay. Although I haven't written a novel, I'm working on a novel in that category. It's on the side, The 10 Breaths of Ra. But I find that this is all very exciting stuff going on in kids' books. Except there still may be a lot of people out there, including librarians and teachers, who think that promoting horror to kids isn't good for kids. They think that kids need to be protected from bad things. But I disagree. And I think there are a lot of people that think the way I do that would disagree as well. And I've got 5 good reasons kids should read horror. as we launch into the things that we're doing. We'll get into those in a second. As I was going through looking for some books, I didn't know I even had these on my shelf anymore. I want to show you this. This is the graphic novel, the comic book I did way back in the mid 1980s when I was publishing. You can see we didn't even have computers to do things back then. I could have had that typeset, but it was going to cost me money. So I lettered that by hand. That sucked. And it was called Bloodlore, or the Bloodlore Chronicles. And this was the back cover. That's me and my dog at the time. There, you can see that. That's mid 1980s. Me with my Tom Selleck, or some might call it my porn stash. Suzanne Hall is a woman that I have not talked to almost since this time, but she helped me write this because this was back when I had the story in my head and I was not at all confident in my writing. And it's a comic book. So, and it looks like this. You can see as I flip through some of these pages here, it's a graphic novel done. It's a story I told all in comic book form. And this was supposed to be a series, and it never quite got off the ground after this book. And back then, this book, and I thought it was really expensive, was $7.95 in the mid 80s. So I just saw that on my shelf, and I thought I'd grab that and show that to you. And also on my shelf, this isn't one of those novels. This is a historical novel, but this is one I got to illustrate the cover on. It's a World War II novel about the attack at Darwin, Australia. But I did the illustration for the front cover, Peril on the Sea. And this was the first time I ever incorporated Rainey, you can see her right there, my wife, into a cover illustration. So there you go. Those are the main characters in the novel by Jonathan Verhoeven. And Peril on the Sea, it was called. And that was sitting right there. So we'll just set that aside. And I've got other things I want to show you and read you tonight, for you tonight. But let's go through these 5 things. Number 1, 5 reasons that kids should like horror and read horror. Number 1, horror offers solace. Kids today are living in a scary world. And it's a world with global pandemics, school shootings, as Pearson just told us, bad weather, tornadoes. Some of that's natural, and you can't avoid that. But there's no way to shield our kids from any of that stuff. Instead, we should lean into it. And scary books do that by offering something I like to call safe scary. Reading scary books allows kids to navigate their fears in a controlled way. If it's too much, they just close the book. That's the beauty of having a book. That's a little too much. I'm going to close that book. And when asked why people want to go to the movies and be scared, Wes Craven, who wrote such things as The Serpent and the Rainbow, or directed them anyway, he famously said, "You don't enter the theater and pay your money to be afraid. You enter the theater and pay your money to have the fears that are already in you when you go into the theater dealt with and put into a narrative." And that's subconscious, I think. The same is true for stories and books. Number 2, scary books have agency. What do I mean by that? Agency is a thing that adults take for granted. We're used to deciding what time we get up and what we're going to do with our day, what to eat for dinner, what to cook for dinner. But kids don't have that. By their nature and status, they are powerless. I'm talking in the day-to-day things. And another thing adults forget is that kids have the full range of emotions as adults. They just don't always have the language for them. So enter scary books. Scary books give kids agency. Whenever you're following a story, you're rooting for the hero. And who wouldn't you root harder for than the hero in a scary story? You take the hero's hand and you go into the dark with them, but you come back the other side where the light is. You survive. Scary books teach us kids, and they teach kids that we're all going to survive. We'll survive this. Number 3, horror tells the truth. Now, let's be honest. Yeah, Randall Flagg says, not always true for the hero. That's true. Sometimes the hero dies. But sometimes there's a great message when they do. Most good horror stories for kids or young adults or even adults don't have the hero die and leave you hanging in utter despair at the end of the close of that book. Unless they're doing that on purpose to lead you into the next story in a sequel, which happens a lot. But I agree with you. Like when I saw, take for instance, Gladiator, that movie, that came out over 20 years ago, 22 years ago, I think. And hard to believe. But that movie, the hero, sorry if you haven't seen it, spoiler, the hero dies in the end. But it's with great hope is left. His death meant something. So yeah, good point, Randall Flagg. Depends on what a person identifies with, says Sarah Yusuf. Yeah, I agree. So horror tells the truth. Let's be honest, we lie to our kids an awful lot, don't we? We tell them the dog went to live on a farm. Where's the dog? Oh, we took him out to the farm and so he could have more space when he's buried in a shoebox somewhere. We tell them Santa Claus is alive and the Easter Bunny comes and the Tooth Fairy. We make up all these excuses for why mom and dad aren't talking at the dinner table. We sweep the truth into a corner and hope kids never find it. But horror doesn't do that. It doesn't deal in platitudes. It trusts the reader, the kid reader, when it's written for kids, to be able to handle it. It puts you front and center in front of a monster and then puts into your hands the sword to vanquish it through your imagination. Horror believes in kids and it trusts them to go along for the ride. It knows they'll survive the night. Number 4, horror teaches important lessons about fear. What's that, Sarah? If a dog fits in a shoebox, that isn't a dog. Well, true. Hamsters fit in shoeboxes. You got that. We gave Rainey her birthday present. Her birthday is on Monday, but she's going to be out of town for the weekend with the older girl. They went to a scout thing for the weekend. And so all the kids, let's give mom her present before she goes. And we got her a laptop. It's not brand new. It looks brand new. It's amazing. I really want to tout this place. Now, I can't remember the name of the place off the top of my head. I'll tout it another night. I'll give them a little plug here. But we got a great price on a laptop. It's an Apple laptop. It's about 4 years old, all souped up, more computer than she's got in the 15-year-old piece of Dell PC crap that's sitting on her desk that hums or buzzes all the time. And it was time for her to get a new computer. So I thought, what better time? So we had a little tax return fun and got mom a laptop, and a sweet looking. It's those Apple laptops. They now come in that dark silvery sheen, which is very cool. So it looked good when she opened the box. We're like, wow. But she took it, she saw it, and she said, I thought it was a shirt because it's a box like this and about that thick. And she shook it, and we go, don't shake it, Mom. So anyway, I don't know how I got off on that, but so I think it's something you said, Sarah. Yeah, that's the kind of box. I was thinking it just made me think of the size of the box. Boom. Stray brain cell farting, rabbit trail. Let's get back to it. So the point of horror teaches important lessons about fear. And one of the first lessons I learned about fear was that It offered no middle ground. Johan, welcome to the chat room. Good to see you. It's been a long time, at least since we've seen you. There's no middle ground. You either overcome it, the fear, or you succumb to it. That's a fact of life. You look it in the eyes and overcome it, or it will overcome you. And so there's no in between. Storytelling is how we build empathy. It's through stories that we say, hey, I feel this thing. Do you feel it too? And someone somewhere does, and someone somewhere does, is the point. I'm tripping over my words. Someone somewhere does feel it too. And our web gets a little tighter when we feel that. It's a little stronger. When kids read scary books, they see themselves reflected. Books are, as is famously said, windows and mirrors. Windows into other worlds, fantastical places, different places, places we don't normally go. Some are recognizable, and mirrors to our own world, all at the same time. Horror stories are a way to make connections. Now, most of us aren't going to walk down the street and have a fangady-faced clown reaching out of the sewer grate to eat us. That's not going to happen. But those can be representative of other fears that we have. So it teaches kids that they can overcome their fears. You stand and you face the fear. Number 5, horror is fun. Everything I've said before, I meant it. I mean this one too. Horror is fun. Getting scared, it's kind of fun. Horror and comedy are different sides of the same coin. They both require the building and releasing of tension. And in comedies, you laugh. In horror, you scream. It's like watching Monsters, Inc., that animated film. If you've never watched it, I just happened to see a good part of it in the dentist lobby while I was the pediatric dentist while I was waiting for Ellery the other day. She had to get a filling in one of her permanent molars already. And so I'm sitting there watching that, and where they discover that laughter can fuel their charge up their batteries in Monster World just as fast, even faster than fear. So it was interesting, but that's what we are. Horror is fun. Kids deserve to have fun. But have you ever been to a scary movie with your friend and got so startled by something that you started to laugh afterwards? Or you're so startled, like we do ghost hunting. I've been to ghost investigations with people. Now, nobody normally screams and runs around like you see on some TV shows. I haven't seen anybody scream yet. We get startled. I had a woman that was with me that was a good friend of Rainey's and mine, and we were all together at an old hotel way out in western Minnesota. And she had somebody whisper in her ear, a man, and it was ghostly or spirit. And it said some very nasty things to her. She didn't scream. She didn't go running out. She came over. She kind of tugged at my arm. She goes, I just had this fellow whispering in my ear. And he said, and it's too nasty to repeat, nasty words. Think of the C word. Think of words like that. That was whispered in her ear. And it wasn't pitch black, so like, oh, maybe it was somebody in your group having fun with her. No, it was whispered in her ear. So we had other experiences there as well. We had something calling me names, by the way. Here's a little horror on the side for you. Something at that same location, that same night, saying very nasty things to me over EVPs. Spirit box or EVPs, I can't remember. And I said, and it was threatening me. I'll kill you. Growl, all this stuff, and this voice coming through a spirit box. And I said, well, that's fine and dandy. I said, who gave you the right to say that to me? And I came back almost sheepish, and it said, oh, they were EVPs because we recorded for a couple of minutes and played back because you could hear inflection. And it said, I said, who gave you the right to say that to me? What makes you think you have a right to kill me or talk to me that way? And it came back and it said, I'm Lutheran. And it's like, was it the same guy? Yeah, it was the same voice and it was the same line. We had a whole conversation going on. So anyway, I just thought that was horror and funny. But we didn't have people running out and screaming. But a lot of us laughed. We were so darn scared about some things that you laugh. It's about the only way you could deal with it. Horror is fun. Kids deserve to have fun. No one would ever think about taking away a funny book worried about what it would do to a child. Horror for kids is a necessary and important genre, and it's not one we need to shy away from. Horror teaches kids how to stay focused on slaying pretend monsters, so that later in life, when they meet a real one, they'll know what to do. It's a privilege to write horror for kids, to watch them go shoulders back, head held high, straight into the dark, knowing that they're going to be okay. So, yeah, horror is good for kids. And I wanted to bring that up because I think it's very important. And I've got a bunch of little books here that I pulled out that I want to share with you. We were talking the other night. If Joseph is here anywhere from the other night, I've got a list of books here. I couldn't find them all. I couldn't find The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe. It's in all my bookshelves somewhere. I went here. I went upstairs to bookshelves. I went over into the bedroom where we have a bunch of nighttime reading for kids over there. I went over into the other family room over there. I went into the living room upstairs. Went into the kids' rooms, could not find it. So that one's missing. But I got one of the favorite books of my kids. And we've read this on here a long time ago. The Dark. This is by Lemony Snicket with illustrations by John Klassen. If you remember Lemony Snicket, he wrote the Unfortunate Events, the series of Unfortunate Events. Is that what it's called? The series? A series of Unfortunate Events. Those novels for kids. Middle grade. Very great stuff. And he wrote this book about being afraid of the dark. And I thought it was really good. I'm going to read this to you because it's short and easy. Here, put on your, take a sip of your chamomile tea or your scotch, whatever you're drinking tonight. Let's get it started. Laszlo, that's the main character. Laszlo was afraid of the dark. See, the sun's going down. I love the illustrations in this. Very simple for kids. The dark lived in the same house as Laszlo. A big place with a creaky roof, smooth, cold windows, and several sets of stairs. Sometimes the dark hid in the closet. Sometimes it sat behind the shower curtain. The dark. But mostly, the dark spent its time in the basement. All day long, the dark would wait in a distant corner, far from the squeaks and rattles of the washing machine, pressed up against some old damp boxes and a chest of drawers nobody opened. There's the doorway to the basement where the dark lives during the day. At night, of course, the dark went out and spread itself against the windows and doors of Laszlo's house. But in the morning, the dark would be back in the basement where it belonged. Laszlo would peek at the dark every morning. There he is, looking down the basement steps. He'd peek at the dark every morning. "Hi," he would say. "Hi, dark." Laszlo thought that if he visited the dark in the dark's room, maybe the dark wouldn't come to visit him in his room. That's why he did that. He always had a nightlight on at night, and there's his bed as he's sleeping in the dark outside. But one night, it did. "Laszlo," the dark said in the dark. There's Laszlo. His nightlight burned out, obviously. He's got a flashlight. The voice of the dark was as creaky as the roof of the house, and as smooth as the cold in the windows. And even though the dark was right next to Laszlo, the voice seemed very far away. "What do you want?" asked Laszlo. "I want to show you something," said the dark. My kids, by this point, when I'd read this, when they were younger, just on edge. He said, "I want to show you something." "In here?" "No," said the dark. There's the closet, remember? "In here?" "No, no," said the dark. "Downstairs." "Downstairs?" "Yes," said the dark. In Laszlo's living room was the biggest window in the house. Laszlo looked out at the dark outside. Above him, the roof creaked, and he closed his eyes. Now the dark was all Laszlo could see. "No, no," said the dark again. "Not there. It's the big window. Down here. The basement door." "In the basement?" asked Laszlo. "Yes," said the dark. Laszlo had never dared to come to the dark's room at night. "Come closer," said the dark. Laszlo came closer. "Even closer," said the dark. You might be afraid of the dark, but the dark is not afraid of you. That's why the dark is always close by. The dark peeks around the corner and waits behind the door. And you can see the dark up in the sky almost every night, gazing down at you as you gaze up at the stars. Without a creaky roof, the rain would fall on your head. Without a smooth, cold window, you could never see outside. And without a set of stairs, you could never go into the basement where the dark spends its time. Without a closet, you would have nowhere to put your shoes. And without a shower curtain, you would splash water all over the bathroom. And without the dark, everything would be light. And you would never know if you needed a light bulb. "Bottom drawer," said the dark. "What?" said Laszlo. "Bottom drawer," said the dark. "Open the bottom drawer." "Thank you," said Laszlo. "You're welcome," said the dark. By the time Laszlo got back into bed, the dark was no longer in his room, except when he closed his eyes to go to sleep. It's the light bulb. There he is sleeping. The next morning, Laszlo visited the dark in the basement. "Hi," he said. "Hi, dark." The dark didn't answer, but the bottom drawer was still open, so it looked like something in the corner was smiling. The dark kept on living with Laszlo, but it never bothered him again. That's the end of the book. What a great book. It talks to kids about being afraid of the dark. The flyleaf says, Laszlo is afraid of the dark. The dark is not afraid of Laszlo. Laszlo lives in a house. The dark lives in the basement. One night, the dark comes upstairs to Laszlo's room, and Laszlo goes down to the basement. This is the story of how Laszlo stops being afraid of the dark. The dark. What a great book for kids. There's that one. Of course, the one that I looked at the first time when I was in kindergarten, Maurice Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are. What a great book for kids. About a nasty little boy, kind of. And he kind of runs away and ends up on this island. Was it a dream or was it real? We don't know for sure. What a great book this was. This is a book that teaches kids all about fear and monsters and dealing with things in life that way. What else have we got here? One of my favorites. I read this to my twin daughters, Abby and Bryn, when they were younger, and my kids like this one too. We read this on the show here once. The Wendigo's Return. What beautiful, beautiful artwork this has, and it's all about one of the not Cherokee, trying to think, maybe it is Cherokee. The Ojibwa version of the Wendigo. Here it is. Here's the author's note. The Ojibwa term Wendigo is still found throughout the Great North Woods, usually in place names like Wendigo Lake, Wendigo Island, Wendigo Road. But few people nowadays have any idea what the name means. It was in the woods of northwestern Ontario many winters ago that I first heard a version of this delightful tale told by a white-haired Ojibwe, Anishinaabe woman. Since then, my travels and readings have led me to many variations of the same basic theme, echoing through the ancient oral traditions of northern Native American cultures, from the East Coast to the Pacific Northwest. Wendigo tales often took place during the winter moons. This particular story employs a multi-seasonal approach, and it's all about where the Wendigo came from. And it starts, just the first page is, once long ago, in the days of the grandfathers, something strange happened in the North Woods, the land of the Ojibwa. And this is some of the illustration work. It just beautiful, stylized work. And it's all the story of the Wendigo. I love this picture. Look at this one. They're fishing, yet there's that shadow lurking in the background. The Wendigo. And it talks about how people start going missing in the tribe. And the elders all gather together and they're trying to figure out, why are our people disappearing? What's going on? Then you've got, she sees the little girl who's kind of the heroine of the story. She sees the Wendigo in the woods. And she's got some ideas of how to deal with him. And it's how they capture him, how they kill the Wendigo, and spread his ashes on the wings. And it's how he returns every year for his revenge. In the little clouds, like ashes on the sky, of biting bugs. They're all slapping mosquitoes and gnats. It's Wendigo's return. Didn't want to give away the story there for you. But, and so it was that the Wendigo returned and returns every summer to this day, keeping the promise of revenge that he made so long ago. Here's your Wendigo. So that's just one of the versions of the Wendigo. I would highly recommend this for kids. I bought this used on Amazon for like $4. You can see it's still got the old library. I did not steal this from the library. So it's and it's beautiful. I like the dust jackets. I like to keep them. All this one's, no, it's not sealed on there. But the book, the hardcover itself, is gorgeous. If you wanted to take the dust jacket off. That's a good book for kids. Wendigo Returns. Then I've got a few others here that are a little longer. I saw this. I'd forgotten all about this until I picked it up tonight. William Joyce wrote Ollie's Odyssey. And he's the illustrator as well. He has some beautiful illustrations in here. In the secret realm of toys, there are many mysteries. There is the code. Here, let's see. Let me get the right glasses on. I don't have my new ones yet, so using all these different reading ones. There is the code of the toys, which is as ancient as childhood. There's also the magic of becoming a child's favorite, the highest honor in the toy world. Billy's mother made Ollie by hand. He was a toy who would matter. He becomes Billy's best friend, confidant, pal, and yes, Billy's favorite. But there are villains in the toy world, and Zozo, the clown king, is the most feared. He and his toy henchmen, the Creeps, have sworn to steal and imprison favorite toys until they forget their children and become forever lost. When Ollie is toy-napped, Billy must rescue his beloved favorite from Zozo's subterranean lair in the dark carnival place just past the park, through the woods and into the night. Never has a journey of 10 blocks been more epic. So, and his illustrations in this book are absolutely wonderful. If you like a good illustrated book, the text is easy to read. There's not that much of it, although it's a longer book. But the illustrations just are beautiful. Here's some of the Creeps that are Zozo's henchmen. And let's see if I can find a picture of, well, here's where Ollie is wandering. He's lost. He got lost in the park when his boy dropped him and he's looking for his way home. And so my kids love the illustrations. I love the illustrations. And I was going to see if there's any better ones to see here. It's kind of like if you've ever seen Chris Van Allsburg's work. He did a lot of work in pencil. Most of his work is in pencil, but he did the first what's the one The Rock was in a couple of them. The Game. My mind's doing that a lot lately. I hope I'm not going to be like Joe Biden in 16 years. Or 20 years. So, what the heck is the name of the game? The two movies. The Rock is in it, and who else is in that movie? I can't remember shit tonight. What else do you do? How do you say Zarathustra? That movie was based on his book. Oh, what the heck is the name of that movie? Jumanji. Good grief. Why couldn't I remember that, Randall Flagg? Right on the tip of my tongue. Here's Zozo, the evil toy that's keeping them all captive. So, very good book for kids. Good read. And it's not just this weird adventure. It's sensitive at the same time. It's good. It pulls on emotional heartstrings at the same time. And it's really good. I would recommend you pick this up and take a look at it. Ollie's Odyssey. Well worth getting, by William Joyce. A couple that I've talked about before. Lauren Wolk's Beyond the Bright Sea. This is a novel. And this is the one about a little girl who was born in a real place. I think it's Cape Cod is where this takes place, or the Chesapeake. Inside the flyleaf, 12-year-old Crow has lived her entire life on a tiny, isolated piece of the starkly beautiful Elizabeth Islands in Massachusetts. Abandoned and set adrift in a small boat when she was just hours old, Crow's only companions are Osh, the man who rescued and raised her, and Miss Maggie, their fierce and affectionate neighbor across the sandbar. Crow has always been curious about the world around her, but it isn't until the night a mysterious fire appears across the water that the unspoken question of her own history forms in her heart. Soon an unstoppable chain of events is triggered, leading Crow down a path of discovery and danger. Vivid and heart-wrenching, Lauren Wolk's Beyond the Bright Sea is a gorgeously crafted and tensely paced tale that explores questions of identity, belonging, and the true meaning of family. And it's all done in this. It's very well written. It's done in this. It's not horror. It's suspenseful. It's thriller. There are things in the book you can't figure out where she came from. There was a little island. This all takes place at the turn of the last century. So in the very early 1900s. And in that Chesapeake Bay island communities and cities and towns, there were people still living on the beach in makeshift huts and houses and things like that. And there was an island there. I think it was called Pelican Island was the name. It's a real place. That was a leper colony. And that's one of the islands that comes to play in this book. And so Lauren Wolk, she wrote this book. She wrote Wolf Hollow, which is another kind of coming-of-age story for a girl that's just like this, but it's good for boys, too. Girls have to listen to boys' coming-of-age stories like that. So, she has a section in the back of the book that's a note about this book. Writing is, for me, the finest possible adventure. All I need is a guide and a place to start. The adventure I took in Beyond the Bright Sea began with a young islander named Crow. She simply appeared in my imagination one day, and I spent a few weeks watching her and imagining where she had come from and where she might go next. I knew she would make an incredible guide the minute she introduced me to Osh and their home, and that's when I began to write. The rest came as it came. And she goes on, she talks about some of the things in this book. I don't want to give this away. There's so many. I don't want to read the end of this. I'll give a spoiler alert here. Just the end of this. No, I won't read it because it would spoil it for you. There's such good stuff in this book. This is the one book where my daughter, my littlest Ellery, she was about 6 when we read this. And she said to Rainey, "Why is Dad crying?" And it was very hard to control my tears reading the end of this book. And Mom said, well, there's some things in there that just touch Dad's heart. And so I'm not going to steal that from you by reading that, but there's another great book. This one has to be one of my very favorites. And I've talked to you about this book before. A Monster Calls. This is an incredible book. Brilliant and elegant, with all the thrills and ambition you would expect from the author of the Chaos Walking trilogy. Haunting, lyrical, powerful, and true. Patrick Ness has crafted a masterful story about grief and loss, love and hope that lingers in the heart like a ghost. Compelling, powerful, and impressive. Exceptional. This is storytelling as it should be. Harrowing, lyrical, and transcendent. All of these things are things that people have said about this book. The monster showed up after midnight, as they do. But it isn't the monster Connor's been expecting. He's been expecting the one from his nightmare, the nightmare he's had nearly every night since his mother started her treatments. The one with the darkness and the wind and the screaming. This monster, though, is something different, something ancient, something wild, and it wants the most dangerous thing of all from Connor. It wants the truth. And what an amazing book. And what amazing illustrations. This is just the inside the title page. But look at this. This is how the illustrations are handled in this book. See if I can get it right on the screen. There he is. But see if I've got a couple more of the illustrations in here. Are just stunning. I wish I could draw like this. Or paint like this. This is like charcoal and wash. And it's the monster in this is an old yew tree that uproots itself. Is it pronounced Ceridwen? He tells Connor who he is. He's Ceridwen. And there's a quote from this book that I put on a tumbler of all things that Rainey was making. Oh, did I overstay? Nope. We got 3 minutes left for you radio audience people. There's a tumbler. Let's see if I can find this quick. And I put this quote on there. That's easier than looking it up in the book. It's all I'm doing this for. Photoshop. Open. And I have to go look for Rainey's tumbler on this. And 2 loons. And it is... Oh, if I can even find it in here. We'll see if I can come up with it quick enough. Looking for Rainey's tumblers. 2 loons. Oh, there. That's why. It's not alphabetized. And this book, if you want to read a good book to kids or read a good book to yourself, for yourself, you should look this one up. This is about the tree, the yew tree. I put in here. Let me get to it. My computer's running very slow trying to find it for me. Thank you very much. Not that I'm in a hurry or anything. Here we go. It's coming. It's coming. This is something that the yew tree said to Connor in the book. He says, stories are the wildest things of all. So stories chase and bite and hunt. That's what the yew tree said to him. And he tells Connor 3 different stories in the book. And so and then he asks Connor to tell him a story and to tell him the truth. And this is all very revealing. And it's very interesting how this character, this yew tree, comes out and tells a very poignant lesson. Oh, this is tucked away in the book here. Ellery made a bookmark for me while we were reading this book. Monster, what is a monster calls bookmark. Gar. So there it is. That's my bookmark for this book. And so all of these stories are amazing ways to teach kids lessons. Yeah, Johann, the scariest book you'd ever read is called the Bible. Yeah. It's got some scary stuff in there. Definitely. You want to go even further than that? Go read the apocryphal books. It's like the scary book of the Bible on crack. So I highly recommend this to your kids. If you're going to read to your kids, it's a little heavier, but it's good. And the illustrations are absolutely amazing in this book. All right, let's leave off there for the radio audience. We'll be back with the Captain's Cabin over on the YouTube channel. Everybody else that's listening, just sit tight because we'll be right back. And for everyone else who's here over on radio, I just want to say thanks for being here and live long and prosper.
Join us every weeknight at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The Intrepid radio program, a Scotty Roberts Productions broadcast.
Hey folks, this is Scotty Roberts, and this is the Intrepid radio broadcast. I've been broadcasting for about 20 years now, covering such topics as science, politics, the paranormal, weird science, weird world history, archaeology, and the paranormal. Everything from ghosts to cryptids to creepy things that go bump in the night. So every week I bring you 3 new episodes. Come and join my channel and also be a patron to this site. So see the details below, and we'll see you here. Dave, I love you, brother.
I miss you too.
I miss you too, I heard.
Yep,
Did you guys hear that?
I heard that.
I miss you, Dave. Well, welcome to the Captain's Cabin, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show tonight. This is those of you who are maybe the first time here. The light's not usually this bright, but it is tonight because I was reading, and it illuminates my white hair better. And we were talking about books, more books for kids. And if you haven't been here before, this is just the after show, so it's a little less formal, if you can say that. Even, are we less formal in the Captain's Cabin? I think we're just as formal in the regular show. But for Joseph, I wanted to give you a little bit of this book list again, and anybody else who's out there listening to this. Let's see if this. I've got the bookmark in here. Is this where I was? I want to see something. Raised his hand. They're gone. Hang on. I want to look at something here. Joseph, the first one is called A Monster Calls, and it's by Patrick Ness. Ness. Patrick Ness. A Monster Calls. There's actually a movie that was made of this that really did a fairly good job. I was impressed. And not to put this in your mind as you read the book, but the yew tree, the monster in this, was voiced by Liam Neeson. And he did a great job. Let's see. Hold on. Part of this book. Again, there's so much of this. I would love to read you parts of this, but it would give it away. So I want you to be able to enjoy this book, so I'm not going to do that. But there's the first one, Joseph. I love this book. I love this hardback edition of it. I love the way it's put together with the silver foil on the front and on the spine. I love the illustrations. I love the feel of this in my hand. It's a great book. Really well done. Really well worth reading. All right. Then, what else have we got? Let me pull this chair closer, because I threw them all in this chair. Books by Lauren Wolk. She wrote Beyond the Bright Sea. Lauren Wolk. Beyond the Bright Sea. It's about the little girl who they find, this isn't giving too much away, but she suspects she was put adrift by parents from the leper colony, and when she was a baby, and the old fisherman Osh found her and raised her, and she's 12 years old in this book, the age my daughter is right now, my middle daughter, and Rowan. And so this is a beautiful, beautiful story. And like I say, I don't want to give anything away in the book, but I do want to share a little something. Let's see. toward the end of this book, there's a beautiful little section here. Chapter 40. Let me find it. And there's some of this that brought tears to my eyes. And there's a lot that's mentioned here that's in the story. So we won't touch on that. But Niall, I see you there. Give me a minute and I'll get to you. While the treasure stayed safely under the sea, I stayed with Osh and Miss Maggie on the Elizabeths, and we learned how the stars changed with the seasons and how we did too. Jason never did come there to find me. That's a reference to the book, of course, earlier in the book. I thought about writing to Mrs. Pelham to ask if he'd been back to see her, to ask if she told him about me, but I didn't. I was afraid he might have chosen to let sleeping dogs lie, and on this goes, this little bit of narrative. With Miss Maggie's help, I wrapped pieces of it in newsprint, tucked them in plain little boxes with no return address, and sent them off to an orphanage far and wide. You aren't worried that whoever opens these will simply keep what's inside? Miss Maggie asked me as we packed up the treasure in small portions and sealed the boxes tight. I shrugged. What would you do if you opened up one of these and knew how much food it would buy for those babies? Crow? Miss Maggie said, her eyebrows high. You have to ask? Of course not, I said. And I figure anyone taking care of babies in an orphanage is probably a lot like you. And if they weren't, there wasn't a thing I could do about that. Now, at some point during these long golden years, Osh told me that he'd given me another name when I was new to him. Besides Crow? I asked. He nodded. Besides Crow, in your other language? I asked. He nodded again. What was it? What is it, you mean? I thought back and back. Was, is, will be. I answered, it doesn't matter much since I'm here now and I have a name. I smiled at him. You don't want to know what it is? I made a face. Of course I do, Osh. So he told me. It was another of his foreign musical words, and I vowed to learn how to say this one properly. What does it mean? I asked him. Whatever you want it to mean, he said. I told you a long time ago. What you do is who you are. I thought back over all I'd done since I'd spied that first fire on Pentecost Island, and let it touch a wick inside me. And I decided that I knew what it meant, that name. When I said, daughter, he smiled and put When I said daughter, he smiled and put his open hand on my head. Just like Osh, I said, means father. End of the book. But there's a relationship that builds in this book that leads to that. So that's very poignant to me. Another good one. Joseph, this is for you and anybody writing them down. William Joyce's Ollie's Odyssey. Well worth picking up. Great, wonderful, beautiful illustrations in this book. And a good story. Wendigo's Return. Beautifully illustrated, beautifully written Native American tale from here in North America. Well, beautifully illustrated, as you can see. So, very good book for my kids, anybody's kids. Of course, Where the Wild Things Are, if you don't have that one. Lemony Snicket's The Dark. Great book. My kids love this book. Teaches them about being afraid of the dark. You can see this thing's had a little bit of wear over the years. And that's all I've got up here, sitting on the stack here. So, and then of course, The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe, which I could not find on my shelves here anywhere. But just look that up. The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe. And you're going to see some of the most beautiful illustrations. And it's in a great style that you'll like. Your kids will like them. I just want to see what they're showing here for illustrations. Just look up The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe, and you get an idea. It's got that very New Englandy, what's the word I'm looking for? Colonial America, a post-colonial America look about it. Very well worth picking up. So get that one too. The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe. The little dog picks up his. I had to do this tonight for my daughter, my 9-year-old. I said, "Do you remember the book, The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe?" And I said, "I can't find it anywhere." And she said, "Can't help you." She couldn't remember it. And I said, "You don't remember it? The one about the ghost? It's illustrated. It's a picture book." "No." I said, "It's the one where the dog digs up the grave of Nicholas Grebe and finds a bone and runs off with the bone. And he's looking for his bone. He haunts the farm for centuries looking for his bone." She goes, "Nope, don't remember it." I'm like, "Well, I guess I didn't read it. Maybe I read it too long ago." But he always appeared when his widow first saw his ghost. We're talking in the 1700s when this book takes place. He appears. He's a wispy old man, and his one leg is flapping in the wind because the dog had taken his leg bone out of his grave. And he says, and I always used this voice with the kids. I used it with my older kids. They still remember it. "Forevermore I quest till all my bones together rest." And so it was a great book. The Ghost of Nicholas Grebe, a wonderful story. Well, how's Ireland today?
Good, Scotty. Good to see you. How are you, my friend?
I'm excellent. Good to see you as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and because I meant to catch your show on the horror show that you did.
Oh, yeah.
I look back on that. I wasn't around that particular night.
That's
but
all right.
It's kind of it's really funny talking about looking at some of the illustrations. Some of
Yes.
the illustrations from that book, The Monster Calls, is kind of reminds me of my own kind of stuff.
Oh, these remind me a lot of your style of art.
Some of the, yes, well, that particular one, not so much the others, but the
Yeah,
particular
this one.
yeah.
Like I look at, I think of you when I see this stuff. This is a style. I don't know if there's really a name for the style, but I just passed over it. Like this one, this 2-page spread in here. This looks like something Nile would paint.
Yeah, it's very stricken, and it's always a kind of a creature that's kind of backlit and it's silhouetted, and there's gray skies and it's kind of dark and you're going down, and it's
right.
It's kind of creepy, and it just reminded me. But yeah, I don't know the book, but really, it's very similar to the kind of stuff that I'd be.
It's very similar to the kind of work you do.
Yeah.
It's by Patrick Ness. I'm trying to see who illustrated
I must check that book. I must check that book out.
Illustrator on the cover, which surprises me. Illustrated by Jim Kay, Kay.
Yeah. Would that be a YA book, or is that
what kind of book?
A young, kind of a young person's book, or a
yes,
child's book?
I would consider this middle grade to young adult. So
I think it stands for youth associated, something like that. Yeah. Young adult book. Yes, yeah.
And and it was inspired by an idea from Siobhan Dowd, who wrote a lot of books like this, and she passed away, of course. And Patrick Ness picked up this idea he had talked about with her,
I must check
Yes.
that out. I must check that out. But the reason I'm calling it's kind of funny. It's talking about fear and ghost stories, and
Yes.
stories you read to your kids, and which is I think where you were going with a lot of the stuff you were talking about. That's very typical of the kind of stuff I do.
This is so Niall's work. You got to
Yeah,
go look
yeah,
at Niall's work, folks.
yeah. It's kind of something I'm attracted to. But the funny the reason I jumped on is actually talking about anxiety that people can have about
Yeah.
being scared, and
Yes.
whether it comes from childhood or from popular culture. Um, I got a call. I said it in the chat room, but it's probably way up there, and you didn't get a chance to read it. I just thought it was a funny story. I have a very good friend of mine who's over 50 years of age, and she lives on her own. Was terrified out of her mind the other night because her TV kept turning on.
Oh.
And she went to bed and she put it on standby. It just pressed the red button or whatever, and it turns off. She went to bed, and I think at like 4 o'clock in the morning, the TV came on, and it was playing some game show in the background, and she was absolutely terrified out of her mind. And she because it reminded her of all of those horror movies that you see where the TV keeps turning itself on when you turn it off, and you turn your back and you walk away. Yeah, and the TV comes back on again.
Yes.
So this happened a couple of times. But would you believe it? She actually ended up calling me at like 5 o'clock in the morning because she was so terrified. She couldn't understand this bizarre, horrific thing which she was associating with horror movies. The TV that turns itself back on. That she ended up calling me at 5 o'clock in the morning. And she said, "Niall, why does my TV keep turning itself back on? I don't understand it. It's like, what's going on?" And I was like, "I think I know what's going on because I went through this once before." And I went to visit her a couple of weeks ago, and I noticed her remote control was batteries in her remote control was running low because we kept getting a message on the TV screen. The batteries in your remote control are running low. Please replace them. Now and again. And it happened to me once before. Once especially with these new smart TVs, you've got massive TV, right? With these smart TVs, once the batteries start to deplete, then when you put it on standby, it can suddenly turn on because the batteries are kind of wearing down. So the signal kind of gets scrambled. So the signal between the remote and the TV gets scrambled because the batteries are nearly dead.
Mm-hmm.
So but what was funny about it is that terror in her. She rang me because I think she assumes I'm in tune with all this kind of weirdness. That is it a ghost? Is it my TV is turning itself on? No. I think, and I just said, I think it's your remote control. Just change the batteries. So she went out the next day and changed the batteries, and everything's fine now.
And sure enough,
yeah. And it just goes to show you that sometimes that terror that people have of the TV that turns itself on from all those endless horror movies that we've all seen. It's a trope of horror movies. The TV that keeps coming on by itself.
Yes.
It was so far ingrained in her psyche that she was genuinely convinced that there was some ghostly presence turning on the TV.
Sure.
It was the only explanation.
Now, I've never had the TV or radio turn on or anything. Rainey had, this was many years ago at the beginning of our marriage. I was doing one of the events on the Queen Mary with the ghost hunters. And so I was away in California and she was home in Wisconsin, and my older kids, we hadn't had our own kids yet. My older kids were off with their mother, and we lived in a farmhouse on the ranch, an old farmhouse, 100 years old. And there was an enclosed stairway that went upstairs to the kids' bedrooms. There were 2 bedrooms up, and there was a landing at the top of the stairs. And we kept a little table with a chair there for reading. And a lamp, and it was a lamp that had these coily, the metal coily things for like microphones, and it
Yes.
had the cones on the end. So modern looking. There were 3 cones, and you could click, click, click for 1, 2, 3 lights. 4th click, turn them off. Well, we always clicked one light, so there's always one light on upstairs during the nighttime when they'd close their doors and they didn't come out stumbling and fall down the stairs. And so our bedroom, we had turned the front porch into our bedroom because we needed the room. And so it was all enclosed and insulated. And so we'd go out the front door and we're on the front porch. That's our bedroom. And there were windows on the inside, just plain old windows, the old with the weights and the ropes and the weights that were the window weights inside the window frame. So it was those old windows like that. And those were always open from the house to the porch. And so Rainie's sleeping one night. She got the dog with her, and the dog is standing, the head of our bed was at the windows. So if we just looked up over our heads, we're looking in the house through the windows that were open for the kids. And the dog, little Chihuahua, is standing on the bed with 2 feet up on the windowsill, looking in and growling.
Yeah.
And now there's no kids at the house. Nobody's home except Rainie. And she kind of looks up and over in her stupor in the middle of the night, and she sees who she thinks is Sam, who at the time would have been 8 or 9, going up the step, going into the stairway wasn't open. It was enclosed. There was a doorway. And so you had to go into this enclosed staircase. And she sees who she thinks is Sam going into and she hears it go up the stairs, and then the light goes click, click, click up on the landing, clicks all the way through, and it's off.
Yeah.
And it's dark upstairs.
Whoa.
And all happened in a few seconds. And then she thinks, wait a minute, I'm the only one home.
Yeah.
Whose shadow did I just see?
Yeah.
And she checked it out. Of course, she called me. And so we've had some things like that.
That's very, very similar kind of thing. And it's amazing sometimes that those natural kind of fears, or I put them down to stuff we have been read as a child, or stuff we've been exposed to in movies or whatever. Combine that with people who are naturally anxious about the unexplained, or anything at all. I mean, it goes back to the monster under the bed, the monster in the closet, the monster in the shadows.
Right.
Even old people is a triggering point for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I remember when I was young going to see my grandmother, and it was like going into her house was like that smell of old people.
Right.
She was in a wheelchair, and it was just like this creepiest tomb-like environment. And I've never forgotten that kind of musky smell of kind of.
I know the smell you're talking about.
Yeah, an old house and old ornaments and old pictures on the wall and old religious artifacts and all that kind of stuff. Kind of triggers stuff in people, and that can carry all the way through to adulthood. And I think that a lot of that stuff that we read to kids as like Grimm's fairy tales, a lot of them are very disturbing. Like the troll under the bridge who grabs children and takes them away into the night. The banshee from this country who screams,
a wolf who eats grandmother.
All of that stuff, it could be terrifying. But some kids are more anxious than others. Some would be like really enjoy that. They'll kind of enjoy they won't be so sensitive that they place them. They will place themselves in that situation, but it won't be something that they will remember. It's for the moment. They like that idea of being scared in the moment with that story. But for some people, I wouldn't recommend, reading every child, a
Right.
scary story, because I think you can
Not
tell
every
pretty
child
much.
can handle it.
Not every
Yeah.
child, and not only that, Scotty. I would say that a lot of children grow up to be very nervous around that, and they'll remember these things. Like my friend, who the TV kept turning itself on, and she was convinced it was a ghost doing it, and she actually thought it was the ghost of her father, who died a few years ago, was trying to send her a message. And I said, I don't think so. I think it's just a remote control. And the funny thing is, I think everyone is different in how they approach these kind of fears. I think a
Yeah.
lot of it is the fear of fear.
Yes.
And it's a kind of a neurosis that a lot of humans have.
That's what anxiety is. It's the
That's what
fear of
anxiety.
fear.
Yeah,
It's the fear of the unknown. It's the
yeah,
My
yeah.
daughter did that last night. All we were doing was her older sisters. She needed a new phone. I said, it's going to wait until I get some money in here. I'll get some money. We'll get you that new phone. Well, her phone was dying, and she told her sisters. Her sisters bought her a new phone, and she went and picked it up yesterday. Okay, they bought her an iPhone. And so she's trying to start it up, and there's a delay. We're calling in. It took us an hour sitting on the phone. It's just a ridiculous nightmare doing this stuff with some of these companies, trying to get her phone set up. So we got it all set up, and the guy through his accent, I could barely understand what he was saying, but he said that should be ready now. We kept calling it and texting. It wasn't working. He said, shut it off, turn it back on, wait 20 minutes, and try it again. Okay. Well, my daughter is walking around with this. Now, this is a silly thing to be anxious about, but it's a phone, but she's walking around and she's not focusing on anybody. She's just talking to the rooms, and she's saying, it's not going to work. I just know it. I'm going to wait another 20 minutes and it's not going to work. It's going to fail. It's going to, and I said, calm down. It'll be okay. I said, you know what? If it doesn't work, we'll call them back. We'll get it working. It's not going to work. I am not going to have a phone for my weekend. I am not going to have, and because they went on that trip with mom. And so it's like, calm down, daughter. Anxiety. That's her anxiety.
Well, I think the whole thing of phone anxiety is slightly different.
Yeah.
I think that every teenager or every young person,
hey, Luke Acord,
has a terror of losing their phone. But
nowadays,
I'm talking about the real kind of sense that creepiness. People who are afraid
I
of
only
the dark.
use the phone as an example of a lighthearted example of anxiety.
It's a good example, but sometimes people can carry that around. The fear of the dark, the fear of the creak on the floorboards, and usually it's associated with something from their childhood. I always put that anyone who's ever hung around in an environment with their grandparents and they didn't want to be there, and they kept on getting kissed on the cheek by their grandparents, and I remember that as a child, finding that so creepy. And then going forward, in movies and books, you would always find the creepy grandmother in the creepy house, and the ticking clock. This is one thing from my childhood, which I always remember. My mother was, and her mother was obsessed with time. So they always had this, they couldn't sleep without a grandfather clock or a mantle clock.
Sure.
Ticking away and going doing, doing, during the night. And I remember as a child being really freaked out by these things. And now I kind of like them. But at the time, I remember as a child, it was just the nighttime hours were so, you'd come downstairs and get a drink of water, but you'd sometimes look at the grandfather clock in the corner, and you were kind of looking where the second hand was. Is it anywhere? If it was between the top of the hour and the bottom of the hour, you'd be terrified because you didn't want to hear that doing sound.
Sure.
That tick and that doing sound.
Yes.
So, I just remember things that like are catalysts for that kind of fear, and I think a lot of kids, when my children were young, I always avoided reading stuff like Grimm's fairy tales, and I'd rather go for like stupid books
Sure.
like Flying Pigs, or a sheep that made friends with an elephant, or a frog that made friends with a goat, or
Yes.
the usual stuff, to keep it light and
Good
simple.
morning, elephant, said frog.
Yes,
Good
yes.
morning, frog, said
Yes,
elephant.
yes, exactly. I just found a balloon. Where did you
Oh,
find the balloon? It was passing by.
will you help me
Yeah,
blow up this balloon,
yeah,
elephant?
exactly. And
No, but
Ro-
owl can.
yeah, exactly. And I really think that with some kids, they're not really able for the really creepy stuff,
Yes.
especially the gothic stories,
Yeah.
and especially if they're illustrated, because some kids do have a genuine fear that's kind of inbuilt into them, and I think as parents, you can probably tell whether your child is able for that kind of stuff or not.
Right.
But it is. I mean, I know a lot of adults who would not watch a horror movie to save their lives, and if they did,
I prevent my
yeah.
kids from watching horror movies. From time to time, they've gotten into watching the ghost shows and stuff. My youngest, my 9-year-old, she doesn't like watching the ghost shows. So if I've got them on, I got to turn them off when she comes home or comes into the room. But the most adult book I ever read to kids, and it's not a horror story, though it's got scary elements in it, is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this book. I've read sections from this book. This book is so incredible. And it's Pulitzer Prize winning for what that's worth. And this book it teaches you about racism. It teaches you about dealing with people, about dealing with emotions, and so on and so on. It's a lot of this book is about racism, and without screaming it. It's not the same kind of book about racism that you might find in the news today or in the narrative of today. It deals with it in a very different way.
Yeah, and maybe To Kill a Mockingbird. It's an example of one area, but I think that to teach our children, say something, the relationship to death is very important. I also, another funny anecdote. I had a friend who used to buy guinea pigs for his young child.
Yes.
And guinea pigs have a very short life. A
yeah.
few months.
Like 8 months to a year and a half.
Yeah, but their coloring is very similar. So what he would do is, he'd buy the guinea pig, and she'd be delighted and playing with the guinea pig, and don't let the guinea pig out. And if the guinea pig goes out, we have to find the guinea pig. And then he'd come down in the morning, or his wife would come down in the morning and find the guinea pig dead in the cage. And it's like, oh God, what do we do now? We replace the guinea pig. So they go back to the pet store and get one with exactly the same coloring.
That 18-year-old guinea pig.
Yeah. And I remember I hadn't seen this guy for a while, and his daughter was 9 years old, I think, 8 or 9 years old, and she says, "You have to see my guinea pig." And I says, "Wow, look at that guinea pig! How old is that guinea pig?" He's 5 years old. I said, "Really? He's 5 years old? That guinea pig is 5 years old?" "Yeah, he's 5 years old, And of course, I took my friend aside and said, "What are you up to here, man? How many guinea pigs have you gone through?" "Oh, I don't know, 5, 6, something like that." I says, "You really should be teaching your young daughter something about death at this stage, rather than replacing the guinea pig every time,
Yes.
So there is something to be said about teaching children something of the concept of death and passing on and all that kind of stuff. A lot of parents are very reluctant to do that until the very last moment.
Yes.
So the guinea pig story is perfect for that. Oh no, it's the same guinea pig, So this poor child had no concept of death at all, because it's like the ultimate taboo. Once you question death, or you start to explain death or understand death to a child, and I would say the vast majority of people would be very reticent to explain that to their kids. They would
Mhm.
say, well, they'll come to terms with that in their own way. Now, parents who explain death in a roundabout way to their children through stories or whatever is very healthy.
Yeah.
But some kids are genuinely terrified of anything to do with that. And
Yeah.
sometimes, you kind of have to leave that alone. I don't know. It's a difficult area.
When
Yeah.
we've had a lot of deaths around us, not in a
Mm,
morbid way, but we've just
mm,
known lots of people that have gone on.
mm.
And so our kids kind of have always understood what it is without us really needing to explain death.
Yeah.
Uncle Dave died last summer, and we said, he's gone. And my then 13-year-old son, now 14, he understood it right away. And my kids, one by one, each wanted to know if they would get a visitation from Dave. Will he come and talk to me? Because Sam had his story, a couple of stories. And we said, I don't know. That's up to your situation. Rowan had a dream. She was the one that asked. She was like, I really want Dave to come and talk to me. And she had a dream where he came into the house. He was carrying his cane, holding it, but not using it. And he sat down on the sofa next to her and gave her a big hug. And he said, I just want you to know that I love you. And then she woke up, and that stuck with her. She
Yeah,
believes that
you've
was,
always had a very healthy approach with your children in explaining death and these stories.
yeah.
And I'll just give you another very recent story. Another friend of mine, a male this time, he was a carer for his mother. His mother was actually had MS like me, but she was a lot worse. So he was a carer for her, and she died pretty much suddenly. But she had an elderly kind of small terrier dog who was inseparable to her. He was always slept on the bed beside her for years and years and years. So she went into hospital and died. And the dog kind of gave up on life very quickly within a couple of months of her dying. He slowly started to go downhill. And I went over to see him again just a few days ago. And this dog, I saw this small little terrier lying in its basket. And I said, that dog hasn't moved for hours. And he says, oh, no, he's okay. He's okay. He's just, he hasn't been the same since my mother died. And I says, are you sure? Are you sure he's still alive? And that night, that night, I stayed overnight in his house. And I was a bit creeped out by his relationship with this dog, because I took one look at this dog and said, that dog is dying. That dog's. I says, I know he'll be okay. And I remember hearing his voice the following morning, and he was like, I could hear him whispering from the kitchen. I slept on the couch in the living room, and I could hear, come on, it's okay. Come on, try, please try. So I went out, and this is a grown man, and I went out, and he was desperately trying to lift the dog's head to get it to eat something, to drink some water. And I said to my friend, I said, listen, brother, this dog is, we need to bring this dog to the vet and get it put down. I mean, this dog is dying, and we don't really know how much this. Oh, no, it's fine. And I know that he was, because he was still trying to come up with the death with his own death of his own mother. So he was projecting that onto the dog. And the funny thing is that the dog, not funny as in but peculiar thing is that the dog was also probably dying of a broken heart, because it was so used to its his mother's. But this dog was in a pathetic state, and he was in tears. He was in tears in front of this dog. And I said, listen, man, he says, no, it'll be okay. We'll come back in a couple of hours and see what happens. Okay, fine. Anyway, that night, I stayed for a couple of days, and that night the dog was even worse, and he was like, "Come on, eat something," and he was absolutely in tears. I says, "Craig, this is ridiculous." That's his name. I said, "This dog is clearly checking out. You know, it doesn't want to be here anymore.
Right.
It's at it. It's not eating. It's not drinking. It's not moving. It's not pooping. It's not peeing. It's not moving. You know, this dog has had it. You know, and the kindest thing, and it's not a young dog, so the kindest thing to do is just no, it's fine." And so he brought the dog, this little dog, into the sitting room. He says, "We'll watch a movie," and the dog kind of did lift its head at one stage, you know, and kind of looked around a bit. See, there's a bit of life left. So
he's just looking around.
and it's like I put the head down straight away, and I'm like, this is bizarre, you know.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of
Well, that's
strange kind. I believe he's haunted by the ghost of his mother, who's haunted by the ghost of the dog,
Sure.
It's all wrapped up in one kind of fear of death. You know,
sure, and all of that's right here too.
Yeah, and the first thing I wanted to do was take the bloody dog down to the vet and just say, put it out of its misery, but he refuses.
That's
to
like
do it.
Our old black cat Oscar.
Yeah,
you know, when we put him down a few months back.
Mm.
He was for 2 or 3 days, and he was pretty quiet and slept all day anyway. So it took us a couple of days to go, anybody seen Oscar? What's he doing? He's downstairs sleeping. And we realized he's not eating, he's not drinking, he's sleeping, and he's pooping on his bed. And so it's like, okay, we think Oscar is gone. He's on his way out. And so we talk delicately about it to the kids. Oscar is, sometimes they just don't. Well, maybe if we put his water and his food on the bed next to his face, I said, I don't think that's going to do any good. You can put it up there and you can see, but I said, sometimes these animals will just stop eating and they'll stop drinking because, well, number one, they might be too sick, and number two, that's their way of checking out.
Animals are, you know, different to humans. They don't make a big scene about it, or they don't, you know.
Right.
A lot of people think that humans, you know, there's a big process involved, and we have to come to terms. We have to talk to our loved ones, and we have to connect with ourselves spiritually. It's a zeitgeist thing. But with animals, they usually just go quiet. They find a corner, or they find some place to hide. Yep. If they're out in the wild, that's what they do. If they're in a house, they'll just go in a corner and they just want to die. You know, they're just waiting to die. But what's interesting about that case, this is a grown man who was terrified of this dog dying, because I think maybe he didn't want his own heart broken again, or maybe he felt
that's
guilty because the dog was.
The psychology of having loved ones.
Just I thought it was very, very bizarre. For me, I've never been a massive animal lover. I mean, I do like a dog, but you know, I also know when a dog is dying. You know, so I certainly wouldn't put them through it. But to see someone so desperate for this poor little dog to cling on to some semblance of life was kind of disturbing to me. In that, really, there's no need, and the right thing to do is just. And my friend was in tears about this, and he just couldn't get us that. No, he'll come round. I said, "There's no coming around here. He's soiling his bed, like you said. He's not
going to come around. You just have to,
you can leave him there for another few days, but the kindest thing to do is to bring him to the vet in the morning and get him put down. Oh no, I can't do that. I can't. He was my mother's dog. He was my mother's dog, and I can understand that." The dog dying so soon after his own mother's death is probably too much for him to take.
Yeah.
And, but it just shows you that relationship with death is very closely kind of monitored, even as adults, we find it, we kind of revert to childhood in a way, when we're confronted with death and the grieving process. A lot of adults don't go through the grieving process as it's kind of set down. They kind of go through the grieving process like children. It's like, it's like the monster in the shadows. I can't look at that. I'm not going to look over there. I'm just not going to go there. I'm not going to look over there because I don't want to think about it. And that's what gets me about our relationship with death. And going back to the whole thing about our relationship with scary stories and our telling our children, it's healthy to tell our children about death. Now there are some children who are naturally anxious, as I said earlier on.
Sure.
So it's something that you kind of have to, it's a windy road that you have to navigate. But generally, we have a very repressed culture in this country, in Ireland, regarding death. It's like, if somebody is sick, it's almost like something that you just don't mention. If you go and if somebody is dying of cancer, oh my God, you have to go in and you don't know what to say, and it's almost like we have to get out of there as quickly as we come in, and it's not a nice experience. And I think one of the reasons I draw the kind of stuff that I do is, as an anecdote, ever since a child, I was fascinated with horror and scary stories. So I said, listen, what I'm going to do, it was a conscious decision, I'm going to walk with my demons. I'm going to walk with my demons. And that includes death. So I'm going to just be there and walk hand in hand with them down this path. Because I knew I was very sensitive as a child. And I knew I'd be a very anxious adult. And I knew that I was good at art. So it was natural for me to tackle this whole idea about death and try and get over my fear of it, or fear of somebody close to me dying, or fear of my pets dying, or just the fear of the outside world, fear of the monster under the bridge, all that kind of stuff. So I just started to draw this stuff just to kind of as a way to combat that, So I would create the monsters. I would make them fearsome. They would be my monsters. And it's funny. And that's how my whole career in that type of genre started, was more or less me looking and saying, I'm going to confront the demon. I'm going to walk hand in hand with it. And it's never proved scary to me in the slides. Like the fear, I have no fear of death. I have no fear of dying in my sleep. I do have the natural fear of, my mother's in her late 80s now. I'm like, she's not ready to go. I will be prepared for it, but it's a natural part of life. But I know she's not going to live to 100. It'd be very unlikely. But apart from that, I don't have a fear of everything surrounding death. Or, as I said earlier, the fear of fear and how powerful it is in adults, and how many people are neurotic about not talking about things, the worst case scenario. People are very, very careful to avoid the worst case scenario, and the worst case scenario is sickness, death. People who are begin to lose their minds after a while. Dementia is a big problem for people to deal with.
I would fear dementia
all of these
more than death.
Yes.
So I don't want to lose my mind. I don't want to crap my pants in front of my family, type of thing. I don't want that to happen. I don't want to forget who my relatives are, who my loved ones are.
But dementia is a very scary thing. And another recent story, just very quickly. I was in hospital recently. I was in an accident and emergency. That's another story. I never complain about my own problems, but I was in accident and emergency. I was waiting there for about 8 hours in accident and emergency. And there was a couple of guys standing for hours beside this hospital bed. And the place was packed, typical accident A&E. people coming and going, doctors, nurses, lots of noise, all this kind of stuff. And it was their mother. And she had caught some flu-like symptoms, and the nursing home she was staying in, they thought it might be COVID or something related, so they sent her to the A&E, and they called her sons. And these sons were in their 40s and 50s.
Sure.
And they really didn't know how to deal with her. And I remember talking to them at one stage, and she says, "Oh, she has dementia. She doesn't know who we are. She doesn't know anything." It's like, I wish, one of her sons actually said, I just wish she died, to be honest with you. It's ridiculous at this stage.
Yeah.
She's no quality of life. And he said to me, it's costing us a fortune, which I thought was very straight talking, you know.
Yeah.
It's costing them 25 or 30 grand a year to keep her alive, and she doesn't know who anybody is. So that all of this stuff we're after talking about now is kind of comes from the same source. You know, it's that fear of confronting death, or confronting encroaching death, or how do we deal with these things, and how do we teach our children? I don't know. I think it really depends on the child. But I as I said to you, I know a lot of adults that are so terrified of death, it's the ultimate taboo, you know, and anything related to death or sickness or illness or anything outside the norm, you know. If somebody has a nervous breakdown, or if somebody has, I would even go so far as if somebody has an addiction problem, you know, it's like, wow, this person is it's almost like they're mentally deficient in some way, and we can't deal with that. So I think, as on a societal level, the whole idea of reading stories to our kids is kind of gone now, because it's everyone is anxious. You know, everyone is anxious about the world, about themselves, about So I think it is a good thing to teach children about death. I think it's going to be very difficult. It'd be interesting to see in future generations how they deal with this. How they feel with how they deal with neurosis and the fear of death and all that.
I wonder. I've noticed that my children, my second gen of children with Rainey compared to my first, there's not enough of an age gap there for my older children to be the parents of my kids, but maybe the youngest. But because my oldest are 32, my youngest is 9, and then everybody ranging in between. So, but they have said they noticed that generation gap, that difference from the way kids are now to even how they were when they were growing up 15 and 20 years ago. And they didn't have the internet like we have now. We had the internet, of course, but they didn't have all the things kids have access to now. My kids now, they deal with things in a very different way than my older kids, because they have different stimuli, different things, places where they pick things up. I kind of grieve a little bit the fact that I'm not the one teaching them those things, because they've already picked it up. If I go to teach them something, they've already picked it up through some sarcastic bint on the internet. And, and it's like, well, damn it. And, you can't outlaw it. You got to work with it.
You got to work with it. And it's a completely different scenario. Even if you look at people in their 20s, people who are, especially girls who are like, super glued to their smartphones 24 hours a day. And what they're terrified of is not what we were terrified of. They're terrified of how good they look, or their peer group and how they appear, and and all the infighting and social media and all this kind of all these pictures that they take of each other, and it's like a sport. You have to look better than the next person, and if you're not, you get depressed. And suicidal. It's like, that's completely different to when we grew up. the power of the internet can be very, very destructive for young people. And so moving forward, the kind of stimuli that's going to terrify young people or even children is going to be very different to what terrified us.
It's going to be the loss of a phone.
Yes. Yeah.
That terrified my daughter.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
so,
like, sweetie, you know, we need to move out to the country, I think, and, you know, make you run down to the creek to get bathing water every morning, you know, kind of thing. You know, there's something came to my mind, and I don't know why, but it's worth bringing it up. I don't think I've ever told this story before, but we had when we had the ranch, we had some Chihuahuas, and they had puppies, and then the puppies had puppies, and suddenly we had like 15 Chihuahuas. Now, not 15 Chihuahuas that were our daily. They're part of the family. We had 15 Chihuahuas, and you know, from birth, and we're waiting for them to be old enough so we can sell them or give them away. And there was a brother and sister Chihuahua pups that mated, and we're like, uh-oh. And sure enough, there was one of them that was really badly deformed, and we thought, this is not good. And what do? Do you have to drown them all in a bucket or something, or are the good one's going to be good? They have some errant gene, but I don't even remember how we handled it. We didn't kill any of them except one. There was one that was, his lungs were obviously deformed. He wasn't breathing right. His whole back end didn't work. You know, he was about this big. And we thought, and I really got attached to him over a day, maybe 2 days. We kind of wanted to see what was going to happen. And we found it just nothing was working for him. Suffice it to say, folks, it wasn't like, oh, he could grow up and you could make him a little wheelchair and things like that. No. He was badly deformed internally. Things weren't working. And so and this was before Flynn was even born. So we didn't have our 3 now. We had my older kids who were still at home. And I said to Rainey, I said, I think I just need to take him for a little walk, and I'll take care of him. And I had, like I say, I had grown very attached to him, mostly because I put a lot of emotion into hoping he'd be okay over a couple of days, and holding them, and you know, and trying to feed him and stuff like that. And he'd whimper and he'd cry and he'd do the things the little puppies do. And so finally I decided, this is it. This is what I'm going to have to do. And remember, we're on a ranch. We've got 20 horses plus out there and all that land in the woods and stuff. I just went for a walk down the dirt road on our property, and I had this little puppy in my hand. And I remember I kind of talked to him a little bit. I said, not that he understood me. I don't even know if he grasped the emotions. He was 2 days old. And I said, I'm sorry that this happened to you, and I'm sorry that I'm going to take your life. And I said, because I don't want you to get older and suffer. I don't think he ever would have grown up, but I didn't want him to suffer along the way for 3 more weeks, even, to decide we should have put him down the day he was born. So I took him out, and as I'm walking down the road, I said my words to him, and it was very emotional. And I thought, why am I so emotional about this little newborn puppy that fits in the palm of my hand? And I don't even know who he is. He's not a child of mine. But I grew very attached, and I felt very emotional about it. And I thought, the quickest way, I'm not going to bash his head with a rock or something. I thought that's just gross. And so I thought, quickest way, I'll just snap his neck. And so as I'm walking down the dirt road, I had him in my hand, and I just went, and it didn't work the first time. He yelped. I thought,
Yeah.
oh, fuck, was my response. And I started to cry, and then I just did it again, and he was gone. And I thought, here I'm trying to make this quick end. I'm like, I'm not going to drown him in a bucket. What a cruel way to go. I'm not going to tie him up in a plastic bag and let him suffocate. I thought, I'll break his neck, he'll be gone. And it took me 2 tries.
It's very brave of you to tell that story, Scotty, because that's a very powerful thing. We all have these visions that we could do something like this, but to
Yeah,
actually do that is very difficult.
it
Even to
was tough.
and we have this idea that we can just snap its neck and it'll be very quick, or we can throw it in a river, and
Yeah,
but
I don't have
but
to worry about him now.
but you have to live in a way with the repercussions of doing something like that. I would have taken the coward's way out in your case. I wouldn't have done it myself. I would have rang a local vet and said, "Listen,
Sure.
would you put this animal down for me?"
Sure.
Because I don't think I would have been able to go through with what you did, and I think it was a very difficult process, because taking a life, even of a small creature, sometimes, as you discovered, it's not that easy. It can take a couple of goes, and they're still alive, and that's very traumatic.
And it was tough. I came back crying to the house.
Yeah.
And Rainey said, "Oh, did you go through with it?" And I said, "Obviously." And I was shocked by the fact that it was harder to do on a little puppy that's that big than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, of course.
It was like trying to twist rubber and break it, is the way it felt in my mind, in my memory.
Yes. Yeah.
And you could feel the bone in there, but at the same time, it was like, this is not just like a dry, dead twig that just goes snap. And which is, I must have been what I was expecting. And then I felt bad that it cried. I felt bad that it was that I had to do it. But I thought, I'm not going to have anybody else do it. I'm going to do it. And it was interesting. I don't know what kind of deeper impact, if any, that made on me, other than just another layer of things as we learn to do things in life, and we learn our emotions and how we do that. That was, God, that had to be almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, it is. I can totally relate, Scotty, because I'll be quite honest and said I don't think I would have had the courage to do that myself, simply because I would have been just. It's just. I mean, it's one thing saying it, this puppy is in pain, this puppy is obviously deformed. It should be, I'll take it out in the woods and take care of it or whatever. But the actual reality of that is something entirely different, when you're there and this little thing is looking up at you or looking down or whatever it is.
His eyes weren't open yet, so I didn't have to look him in the eye.
And then we have this idea of that, it's going to be very quick,
Sure.
And as you said, snapping a neck is not as easy as maybe we're led to believe.
Right.
Even with the most fragile of creatures.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, it was a very brave thing to do, and a very sad thing to experience. And most of us don't have to go through that. And like, I grew up in a large family that had dogs and cats everywhere. And when the time came for something to be done, or they got sick, or they got killed or run over, it was not something that I ever envisioned myself doing. It's like the story of, I was telling you about the guinea pigs.
Yep.
It's like, rather than deal with death, you just buy another guinea pig. That was my kind of, taking a life of any creature or explaining where it's gone is very difficult.
Now, I was never, I don't have any problem with it. I'm not an advocate for or against it, But hunting, I was never a hunter because I never liked the idea of killing something. Not that I wouldn't do it indiscriminately. If I killed an animal, I envision myself being more like, the way you believe in like Native American, the spiritualism they have. And it's like, I'm sorry I killed you, but thank you for the meat, to thank you for providing for my family. And I'm sorry I had to take your life. Forgive me, they asked. Forgive me for taking your life. And we didn't need to do that. I didn't need to hunt for food for my family. And I went hunting one time in my life, and I didn't like it. I've gone
Again,
fishing.
it's not natural for most people.
Yeah, I didn't kill anything. I didn't shoot anything that time. I would have if I'd had the opportunity. I probably would have shot a deer, but I never had the opportunity. And I don't fault anybody who does. That's their thing, and I got no problem with it.
Neither do I. And I have a very good friend from Tennessee who I speak to regularly, who is both an ex-Marine and a hunter. And he said, "You've never killed an animal." I says, "Of course not. I wouldn't kill anything." And he says, you do it once, and it's a horrible experience because you come across the animal, you shoot it, and then you have to see it shaking in its dying throes, and it's fouling itself, and it's kind of looking at you with these eyes, it's kind of foaming at the mouth, and it's not very pleasant. It's not, it's not like you see in the movies. You just shoot it and it goes down.
Right.
And that's it.
Right.
It's a horrible thing, and kicking its legs.
Like I've said, I always wanted to have a bear rug in front of my fireplace, but I don't want to go kill a bear so I can have his skin and his fur for a rug. I'll go buy one in a store maybe, but
yeah. But that's it. Everything we've talked about in the last little while is kind of all related to this idea of horror stories and scary stories, because they all involve this kind of thing.
That's right.
To one degree or another. Except we're kind of one step removed from it.
Not to be so utterly self-serving, but in my book, The Sword in the Clay, I've got a scene in here. Remember, it jumps back and forth between World War I and Caesar's Gallic Wars. And let's see if this is where it starts. Yeah. It jumps a little back and forth between the two. But there is this scene in the book. It's actually where the cover picture comes into play in this scene. And I'm going to read part of this. They're in a battle. They're at the Battle of Samara Briva. And I've taken this fictional character here, Marius Abruzzo. And
I'm gonna let you read, and I'm just gonna disappear to the bathroom.
Go ahead.
So now's the perfect time. So you read away.
Okay.
I'll be back in a second.
And folks, this is deep into the book. It's not a very long book, but they're talking about the battle. They're in this battle against the Gauls. And here's how this goes. And this is dealing with death here, but it's a big long section. So let me cut it a little short here. It's talking about the battle. Marius and his brother and the Roman soldiers are all in a fort on the River Somme. And life inside the Roman fort was tightly constrained. Marius and his brothers took shifts sleeping on a single small corner of the ground that was not already taken by other soldiers. Marius's centurion rank certainly could have benefited him in this regard, but he never abused the privilege. Caesar had led the bulk of his forces to the south, leaving the 3 legions to defend the fort. They had quickly deconstructed the sprawling camp before the Gauls arrived and hauled every last soldier and camp follower with all their gear inside the walls of the inner fort. The space was not built to house even 1/3 of the 3 legions present. If Caesar's plan was to work, they needed to seem very small in number compared to the Indutiomarus's 60,000 Gauls. The Gauls surge! On the 5th day, the call rang down from the top of the wall and through the small fort as Indutiomarus led a charge of foot soldiers over and through the Roman defensive ditches and up to the walls of the fort. "Ah, the crescendo begins," said Marius to his brothers, cocking an eyebrow. Over the undulating fields to the west of the fort, thousands of Gallic soldiers marched in ragged formation from the edge of the thick black forest, like molasses slowly pouring into a bowl. The Roman soldiers inside the fort were stationed along the walls, taking up defensive posturing. They didn't want Indutiomarus thinking they were an easy target, but they also had no intention of letting him know just how many men they actually had. They wanted him drawn in for the kill. "Wait until the Gauls exhaust themselves in their battle rage and begin to withdraw themselves from the walls," Marius ordered his brothers and cohort. "That is the moment we charge from the gates and engage, with speed and with formation, so fast that they will not have a moment to reason whether they should fight or run. We will be the savage hordes that has them pissing themselves before they can even think." A third of the centurions and their cohorts were under the command of Marius, while another third were focused on the southern gate and the rest of the smaller auxiliary gates. The Gauls continued to hurl fiery missiles and debris over the walls, while the gates received a constant barrage of battering. Had there been even the slightest sign of splintering wood, the Gauls would have raised the tempo of their onslaught, but the wood was yet green and the gates held strong. Then, ever so slightly, late in the afternoon, there was the breath of a pause in the battering. The ram again hit hard against the gate, accompanied by the shouts of the Gauls manning it. 2 more hits, then another sliver of a pause. The clamor of the Gallic warriors lessened almost indiscernibly. Without moving a muscle, Marius's eyes met his brother's. With the final hurrah of the encroaching evening, the silent music of Gallic fatigue wafted gently over the walls. "Hear that?" said Marius, whispering. Then, raising his hand in the air to signal the other centurions, he said to Luigius and Cestus, his brothers, "The chorus of siege has softened for the day." "On my signal," bellowed Marius. He commanded, the command echoed throughout the fort, from centurion to centurion, cohort to cohort. A soldier called down to Luigius from the wall to inform him that the Gallic chieftain was atop his warhorse at the center of the horde, 50 paces in front of the fort. "Indutiomarus, 50 paces out the northern gate," Luigius informed Marius. "This is where we take him," said Cestus, spinning his sword and wiping it with his hand. "Follow my lead," Marius ordered. His brothers passed this down the line, while they all would attack the storming Gauls. It was Marius, his brothers, and a select few men who were to focus solely on the rebel leader. Marius's hand was still high in the air, paused for what seemed an eternity. Then the call came down from the wall, "The enemy withdraws!" "Now!" shouted Marius, his hand dropping to his sword. The order echoed through the mass of Roman legionaries inside the fort. The gates to the north and south swung open, and 3 legions poured into the sea of Gauls outside the walls, attacking with the ferociousness that had become the reputation of Caesar's army. Indutiomarus, sitting atop his horse, at first thought he was seeing a bold attack of Roman bravado from the fort's last small force, but within moments, as the legions continued to pour through the gates, he learned very quickly that this was a much greater force than he had expected. The ruse was up, and he realized his position was not as defensible as he had thought. He had not been expecting an offensive from the besieged fort. The Gauls, in total surprise and shock, despite their greater numbers, turned to flee to the woods as the Roman legionaries cut them down in pursuit. Indutiomarus cried the order to retreat and was driven to the south of the fort and down the river's edge with a small contingent of foot soldiers. "Do not let him cross the river," shouted Marius, as he, Cestus, and Luigius, along with 20 men, hacked their way through the overpowered Gauls. The Romans cut down thousands of retreating Gallic soldiers, many of whom only started fighting as Caesar's army overtook them. Their lines were completely broken as they ran for their lives, scattering in every direction to avoid the onslaught. Indutiomarus galloped his war horse into the shallow water at the river's edge. Luigius was the first to reach him. He took out the horse's legs with his sword and felled it headlong into the water. Indutiomarus went flying over the front end of the steed, face first into the river. The horse thrashed in the water, and Marius watched Indutiomarus struggle through the shallows. Cestus, along with several legionaries, was fighting to Marius's left, while Luigius and several other men fought the Gauls who were protecting their chief. Marius clashed with several Gauls, half of whom were attempting to run, the other half flailing at nearly every thrust and slash of Marius's sword. He was clearing his path to Indutiomarus, who was now standing, thoroughly drenched but still holding his axe, taunting the Romans to come within his reach. Marius broke through the last Gaul defender and stood 2 paces from the bellowing chieftain. He had no thoughts of battlefield quips or heroic lines such as, "Now you fall under the greater glory of Rome," or any such storybook nonsense that could be invented around future campfires. He extended his arm, pointing the tip of his sword at Indutiomarus's face. The Gaul screamed in a berserker's rage and thrust himself at Marius. Then it goes to a next chapter, and we're back in 1918 or 17 in France, Amiens, and then where Will finds the sword in the clay. It's that scene, and we're going to cut right back to in the next chapter. It's called Band of Brothers. The axe of Indutiomarus came down strong and hard, but Marius parried it clear with skillful swordsmanship. The Gallic chief was an enormous man, even towering over Marius, who sidestepped with his parry and used the weighty momentum of the Gaul to push him back down into the water, slapping him hard on the back of his neck with the flat of his sword as he passed. The Gaul sputtered in the water for a moment as Marius turned to defend himself against a spear thrust from one of Indutiomarus's personal guard. Cestus and Luigius were clashing with several other Gauls as the chieftain's fatally wounded horse continued to kick and thrash on its side, attempting to keep his head out of the water, insane with its own pain. Indutiomarus scrambled on his belly through the water to avoid being kicked in the head by his own horse, ending up on his hands and knees in the rocky shallows. Several Romans were clashing swords in savage close combat with the Gallic soldiers. A fearsome melee closing in on all sides around him, and as he struggled to stand, his hand hit the shaft of his axe where it had fallen in the water. He ducked to avoid the flailing hooves of his horse, then in one fluid motion clutched the axe, brought it down hard, putting his poor beast out of its ghastly misery. Now standing with both hands gripped around the handle of the axe, he swung it around wildly in a broad arc, planting it firmly into the lower back and hip of Marius Abruzzo, whose eyes went wide with searing pain. He staggered a step as he heard Indutiomarus scream out in Gaulish, "Die, Roman pig!" Without even thinking, and before he would allow the pain to overtake him, Marius swung his sword in one broad arc, taking off the head of Indutiomarus. The momentum of his swing spun Marius around and down into the river waters next to the slumped body of the Gallic chieftain. The river waters filled Marius's ears, and the noise of the fray grew silent. The sky was the brightest blue he had ever seen, and a small cloud drifted far above. The water around him flowed red. He saw his brothers' faces hovering above his, looking down and yelling to him and to each other. They were grasping his arms and his shoulders, pulling him out of the water. His own hand was still clasped tightly around his sword. All was quiet. The fighting was over. "Brother!" screamed Cestus. "Brother!" whispered Luigius. "Brothers!" sputtered Marius, eyes fixed 1,000 miles away. "Remember me." And they spoke no more. The Gauls were driven back from the bend at the river Somme. 3 legions of Julius Caesar's army had defeated the rebelling Gallic chieftain, killing Indudio Maris himself as Caesar had wished. The Abruzzo brothers were granted leave to take their eldest brother's body back to their father's estate in Italia. Within a year, Caesar's Gallic War would be over. On a small sweep of hillside not far from the fort, in the midst of a small grove of ash trees at the bend of the river, Luigius and Cestus thrust their oldest brother's sword deeply into the ground, laying their hands atop each other's hands, atop the sword of Marius. They chanted an old vow: "Sine vita et seguin nostro et anima, nostro semper memoris sumus tui." A promise to always remember their brother with their lives, their blood, and their souls. And then it goes into the down chapters, the falling action. But there's the illustration I did for that
That's a very fine illustration.
Final scene.
Scotty.
Thank you.
That is wonderful illustration. Wow.
Oh, thank you. But there's death. Nothing overly deep in that.
No, but I think, as far as I remember now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the inspiration for that book, The Sword and the Clay, was, I can't remember now, was it
Will Bird?
A sword in the clay which was actually found?
Will Bird, Canadian soldier, part of the Black Watch. They became, they were 42nd Battalion in Canada, but they were bestowed on them the Black Watch after the war, like the British Black Watch. But he was in Amiens, France, and after the bombing of Amiens, they're going through the trenches. It's calm, the battle's won, and he finds the sword in the clay. And it's that sword that's still in the museum in Nova Scotia today.
That's right. And I mean, the blade was corroded, but it was fully intact. It was pretty intact, wasn't it?
I actually did an illustration of that sword as it looks today in the glass case in Nova Scotia, and it looks like this. And I put a so the lower one is how the sword looked.
Yes.
And the upper one is, of course, what it would have looked like when it was new.
Yes, exactly. It was like it was.
And of course, we have no idea whose sword that was. But I made it and this is the final picture in the book, by the way. I made it the sword of Indudio Maris, or I'm sorry, of Marius Abruzzo, and which I've got him pictured there.
So that book was a work of fiction which was sparked your imagination about that story about the sword and the clay and what surrounded it and how it got there, etc. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the legend of Joan of Arc. Joan d'Arc, who this deeply religious peasant girl in France who found a sword in a field one day, and she suffered these what she felt were terrifying visions of Our Lady and lights in the sky and voices in her head telling her she had to do something. She had a mission, she felt she was empowered to do something, but she was so tormented, at least the story goes, the mythos, so tormented by the voices in her
Yes.
mind, which she thought were coming from Our Lady, deeply, Catholic, that she fell down in a field in a sort of a trance, and beside her was this sword lying in the reeds beside her, and
which is very
yeah,
Celtic in spirituality. The sword.
yes,
in,
and she found this sword, and she took that as a sign that she had to lead France to freedom. That was her mission. And I think she was 12 or 13 at the time.
Very sword in the stonish.
Yes, very Arthurian in
Yes.
its implications. And it was brilliantly portrayed in a movie with
Wasn't it
the name of the actress,
Milosevic or something? Whatever her name is.
whatever her name is. But
Yeah.
there was a great scene in when she was eventually jailed and about to be executed, where she was visited by what they termed the Dustin Hoffman character. This guy appeared in her jail cell and dressed in a cowl. And I always thought he was Satan, because I thought he was, but he's listed in the credits as her conscience, or I think it's her conscience, something like that. Dustin Hoffman, played by Dustin Hoffman, and he says, he wanted her to make a confession, and he wanted her to admit, that it was all false and it was some kind of deranged idea that she had about this sword that she found. And he said, some of the lines from the movie were, out of all the possible scenarios that you could have found that sword, it could have been a warrior passing by who was leaving a battle and he just decided to throw his sword into the field. It could have been somebody who died there. There could have been, 5 or 6 different reasons why that sword would have been there when she fell, into the field and she found it. But out of all of these different possibilities, he said, Jean, you chose this one, and with that, it's like this orchestral symphonic music came in, and it's like the sword was taken up into the sky and came down and arrived in a field, and the lights and the angels, and and then she broke into tears. She burst into tears, and she said, out of all these possibilities, he said, you chose that possibility. And in the movie, I think she said, yes, but it was still a possibility. And he didn't answer. He didn't answer, I always took that like as kind of a satanic figure.
Yes,
but
yes.
It was listed as her own conscience, kind of, speaking to her about doubting her mission. But the reason I mention it is it's a very similar idea about, the sword that was found and what its history was, and whether any of that is based in reality or not. It's certainly.
I think we would never know the thoughts of Joan in the prison cell.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, we wouldn't know that. But the actual history of that sword.
Right. Yes.
I mean, again, that was an oral tradition that was carried down, that you did find a sword, and a lot of people went to a lot of trouble to find out, did that sword exist? What did it look like? And apparently, it was a long sword. It was like a broadsword.
It's very interesting too. With a lot of these archaeological shows that I like to watch. How they're finding more and more across Great Britain, more and more of these old bogs and places like that are being excavated.
Oh my God!
And they're finding,
especially
some
in
of
this
these
country,
bogs have hundreds of swords in them that are pristine. Well, they're corroded over the years, but they were obviously pristine shape, meaning they weren't like in battle. A bunch of guys fell here and all their weapons are left scattered. They were all placed in these bogs or in these pools of water as sacrifice offering. And they felt
Yeah.
that there were some of those that were specifically made for that purpose,
Mm.
leaving a sword in the water. And then and there was something about the whole thing with the Arthurian legend started to connect with that. The lady in the lake and the lady of the lake, and the number of churches that were at the ends of far ends or one end of these bogs or these bodies of water, chapels and churches and things like that were obviously melding the paganism into the Christianity, and the weapons were left in the water, and so on and so on. And
Yeah, because I mean, the early Christianity was very much based on the
yes,
Saint Michael and the holy the fiery sword of God,
right.
and all of those. But talking about the bog bodies in this country, there's some remarkable findings. Just a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
that they uncovered a bog body, and unfortunately, it was the head and the main body was kind of crushed, and the lower body was crushed down over the years. But the right arm, I've never seen anything like it, Scotty. I mean, the best sculptor couldn't have sculpted this arm and this
Wow.
hand. It was perfectly preserved. Like, it was clawing. It was just like this.
Wow.
And it was just perfectly preserved. The fingernails, the hairs, everything on the arm, and then it just kind of went to this flattened body, and then the body disappeared, and they couldn't. They found, the rest
Sure.
of the body, but the point was the hand and the arm was so perfectly preserved. I mean, you just couldn't do it. I mean,
Yeah.
the best sculptor, would have a good go at it maybe, but it was just perfect. And there's been many bog bodies found like that, and some of them are. A lot of them tend to get kind of squashed over time, but now and again you'll come across a body or a face or the head or something in some of these fields, where they still traditionally dig the turf,
Yes.
and all of a sudden they'll be oh my God, and there's
Yeah.
this thing, because like black oak is priceless, simply for that reason, because you have a tree that's thousands of years old, that's
Right.
perfectly preserved, and it's the same with human bodies that are in the bogs, and it's fascinating. So they have this arm and this hand, and they have a portion of the upper body without the head, but they just have this arm and the hand sticking up like this, and they're trying to figure out what happened to this guy. Of course, everyone says with all these bug bodies, they weren't buried there. They're more than likely murdered,
Sacrificed or
sacrificed, or some kind of conflict involved,
Yeah.
because it wouldn't be a natural burial site in the
Right.
bogs,
Right.
for these bodies, so it's fascinating stuff. Yeah.
It is. And on that note, I think we're gonna
Okay. All right,
call
brother.
this show for the night.
Enjoyed the
let me
chat. Enjoyed the chat. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being in here, Niall.
No
I
problem.
appreciate it, brother.
No
Good to
problem.
see you.
I hope you enjoyed it and it wasn't too much.
It was fun.
I don't think we didn't go too far off track.
Nah.
We just no.
Nah,
It's all
it was
kind of
good.
in the same
Thank
kind
you.
of area. Yeah.
Thank
All
you
right,
for everything.
No problem. Listen,
I'll
enjoy
talk
your
to you
evening.
soon. All right, everybody else, guess what? We're going to get out of here. And so I appreciate the fact that you would spend your time here. And we'll see you again next time, Sunday morning. And until then, live long and prosper.